Welcome into another episode of the News for Jags podcast. I'm Jamal St here alongside Justin Barney, and this is a little bit of a emergency-ish podcast, kind of straying from our off-season formula, but we have to talk about the Jaguars' new defensive coordinator. Ryan Nielsen had that first introductory press conference, kind of our first taste of what Ryan Nielsen will be like this season for the Jaguars.
Yeah, and good to hear. I mean, it's been kind of radio silent since he was hired.
Yeah.
People kind of guessing, you're scrounging, you're talking to former players of his who played for him, trying to get a vibe on what he would bring to that team.
Right.
And I really think Ryan painted a good picture today at the press conference on what his defense was going to look like, would things change radically, what kind of personnel he expects to have, and I think it really it helped not only fans to kind of get a little bit of exhale a little bit on Ryan Nielsen, but what he's going to bring to the team. Where's Trayvon Walker lineup? What he expects from Josh Allen? Will Josh be back? Are we going to see exclusively zone? Are we going to see more man coverages like he ran in Atlanta? So what are we going to see? And I think he helped answer those questions. And to me, I think Ryan Nielsen reminds me a lot of watching the movie Tombstone. He reminds me of an old school throwback kind of guy. He played defensive line at University or Southern California.
Right.
He's a big boy. I didn't realize you told me how big he was.
He's a big guy. He's like 6'5", probably like 285, something like that. Yeah, he's a big guy.
He's a big guy. So he reminded me of like watching a Wyatt Earp, a Tombstone throwback movie from the 90s.
The stash.
It is. It is that
stash.
big mustache. And man, it just reminded me of going to the movie theater and watching a Tombstone or something with Sam Elliott in it. That mustache is on point.
Look, hey, if the stash can bring some of the style and swag of some of those old school NFL defenses from that time period, you know what? We definitely take that.
Bring it back. Bring it back.
But so let's start and kind of go through some of the hit points from his press conference. One of the big ones, at least for me, and we already kind of knew this from him, but he said it. So I just want to kind of take a minute to talk about it. Attack and aggressive. Was one of the first questions he was asked was his style of defense. He said everything they do, they want to be attack and aggressive with it. And I think that's big. We saw the Jaguars defense under Mike Caldwell, a little bit different. Mm-hmm. Not as aggressive is probably not the word I would have used to describe how that defense was. But this defense, very different. They're going to show some of those looks, do some of those things that we didn't see Mike Caldwell doing, but you see some of those other defenses around the league doing, taking advantage of to impact offenses. And that's got to be music to your ears, especially when you maybe think back to that last game of the season against the Titans and you saw some guys maybe loafing just a little bit instead of going and getting into the pile and hitting Derrick Henry.
Yeah, and I think if you look at even going back to when Jalen Ramsey was here, Jalen's an elite corner. He wanted to play more man, and that's what your dogs, your alphas want to do. They want to lock up with those number one receivers. They want to play that. They don't like playing that zone where you're almost ceding a little bit of the yardage and not giving up that big play. And Ryan Nielsen said, hey, we don't want to give up. We want to get in there. We want to prevent those big plays. I can't remember the exact line he used today. It was kind of catchy. But he talked about getting in there, not giving up that big, long play. We want to shut down. We want to be physical. We want to run. We want to send guys, be a point of attack. We want to knock the guys down at the line of scrimmage. Just the kind of lingo he used today was really, to me, kind of like this guy is going to bring an aggressive, physical defense to Jacksonville, and that's something that's not been here. Even in Mike Caldwell's good season in 2022, you just did not have that. You felt kind of like, these guys are okay.
Right.
That the Chiefs divisional game in 2022 where you had a gimpy Patrick Mahomes, you couldn't get him down. I think a Ryan Nielsen defense would have just feasted on a Patrick Mahomes at that stage where you're sending that point of attack, sending guys there. You tell they want to be violent, fast, play to that football, and not sit back and let things come to them. And I like to see that.
Yeah, look, this defense is going to be very different. There's going to be a lot of simulated pressures, showing things that maybe aren't there. You mentioned some of the coverage things that he talked about with wanting to show a lot of man coverage, even if they're not doing it, or press and bail and different techniques like that, but pushing those corners up to challenge those receivers at the line of scrimmage. That's music to a lot of DB's ears.
They want to hear that.
They want to hear that.
That's what they want to hear.
Because that's the type of thing that those guys want to do because – Unless you know you can't hang there,
Yeah.
that's something that they're interested in doing. That's where they want
to
be.
And what NFL player is going to say, hey, I don't think I can shut this guy down? They want that.
No, the Jaguars have had some corners in the past.
Oh, yeah. But go back to Jalen Ramsey. He hated playing that zone. He wanted, in that Patriots AFC Championship game,
right.
he was pissed that they were sitting back in zone and letting Tom Brady feast. And good players, every NFL player thinks they're a good player. They want that one-on-one. They want that invitation. They want to shut the other guy down.
Right.
And I thought it was good, though, too, that Ryan, he almost non-committal in a sense on, Trayvon's going to play here, or are we going to play you're going to ask me about the secondary, what we're going to do there. And I thought he was good in the sense that he's not committing to one thing. Like in Atlanta, a lot of his defensive coverage were based on that man defense.
Sure.
For people who don't know what the man is, the zone is, the man, you're basically man on man. You're one-on-one. You're going one-on-one against that guy. You want to show what you can do, mano a mano, square him up. That's what you like. Zone, you're playing a slice of the field. You're playing a radius of the field where, hey, Tyson Campbell goes up here and he's covering 12 yards, and maybe that's where his complete zone ends at, this 12-yard range, instead of being able to follow that receiver back and shut him down and play that really tight press defense that a lot of these corners want to play. So I think Ryan said, hey, not solely scheme. We're going to play to our players' strengths. We're going to let our players' talent and strengths dictate what we do. And he wants to set those players up for success and not commit to that certain style, which I think there were a lot of questions when he was hired. What is Jacksonville going to do?
Look, and I think that's part of the thing about being a coach. And I love coaches that at least say that. Now, I need to see him do it in practice here, but the scheme has to fit the players you have.
Exactly.
You got 11 guys who are the best 11 that you can put on the field at any one time. I get tired of hearing these coaches that have these philosophies that are like written in stone. Well, this is what we're going to do, and I'm going to run this style of defense. Well, if you don't have 11 guys that can do that, it doesn't really matter.
Exactly.
So you have to take the 11 players you got, figure out where you can put them to get the best out of them. If ultimately they decide, oh, well, we need a 5 technique or a 3 technique, and Trayvon's the best we got there, then we have that conversation. Then you put him there and you figure out who your outside guy is, whether that's your Cyr or Caleb or somebody they bring in. Great. If he gets here and decides and looks at Trayvon and how he plays and says, look, Trayvon's great as an outside linebacker, but he would be elite as this 5 tech.
Right.
Great. Put him there. And then now you've got a blue chip prospect at a spot. If he decides that, look, Trayvon's an outside linebacker and we think that's his best spot, then leave him there too. But ultimately, I am so glad that he said that, because people talk about these scheme versatilities and players are good here, and that's great. And you can typically, it's very rare that a team goes into training camp or goes into the season and they're like, I got 11 guys and I feel great about all of them. You probably don't. You probably never do. So to say, I want to run this scheme, unless you're the Steelers or the Ravens, who have been basically running a very similar scheme for more than a decade, and you've just been drafting for that same scheme.
Drafting well
for that same scheme is very rare. Like, especially a first-time defensive coordinator, that he's going to walk in the door and have, no matter what he wants to play, 11 guys that perfectly fit his scheme. That was one of the things that I kept trying to get out of Mike was, okay, how close is this to a defense you want? Because the Jaguars defense never really looked like the Todd Bowles defense that he runs in Tampa. And I was always trying to dig and figure out, is it because you don't feel like you have the personnel to run it that way? Or is this just the way he viewed defense? Not our problem anymore, not the Jaguars' problem anymore. But that is always the interesting thing, is sometimes, and this goes back to some of the things we saw from the Jaguars last season, sometimes it's simple. Look, you might want the team to do one thing, and the coach might want to do that exact same thing, but if they don't feel like they have the personnel to pull it off, they're not going to call it. That's one of those things like 4th and 1. Everybody was like, just run a quarterback sneak, run up the middle. If they didn't trust those guys up the middle, that probably explains to you why they were running outside. And it can be the same thing for defense. If Ryan Nielsen gets into training camp, no matter what additions they make, and he decides, I don't feel like we have corners that can hold up in man-to-man coverage, guess what he's not going to do? call man-to-man
right.
coverage every down.
Right.
Like you just have to adjust, and smart coaches tend to adjust. Now, the job of the front office is to get that coach all of the players that he
Right.
needs to run the scheme that they hired him to run.
Yeah, and I think when you look back at Jacksonville defenses in the last 15 years, and you look at defenses that were Todd Wash defenses or Gus Bradley defenses, where you're trying to almost mash down this scheme without the players or players playing out of position and just wrong defenses. And that's why the scheme conversation was so important today. You know, a lot of coordinators will come in to a system and say, hey, I'm running a 3-4. I've got, you know, the 4-3 defense doesn't work, so I'm going to have to reconfigure things. I think that's wrong. I think you end up getting rid of players that could actually play for your team and make an impact offer the scheme system that, again, you're trying to fit the proverbial square peg in a round hole in a lot of these situations with guys coming in and trying to change up schemes and just things that just do not work. So I liked hearing Ryan Nielsen say, we're going to play to our players' strengths, and a lot of that is going to kind of morph. I mean, what we do and the things we do may not. You know, I think it was it was asked about Trayvon played 10 to 12 snaps with your hand in the dirt kind of thing.
Size.
You're not doing that. And I think when you get into OTAs, Ryan Nielsen talked about we're going to see what Trayvon does well, and they're going to make a decision on where he's going to play instead of saying, hey, we drafted this guy as an edge, we're going to make him an edge. And you know, Trayvon's a natural position in the NFL. Yeah. Maybe with his hand in the dirt. I mean, personally, I think he's going to be a menace with his hand in the dirt if he can master that position. And I think that's Trayvon's. Can you imagine Trayvon on a line, year 4, year 3, developing into that natural hand in the dirt kind of defender? And maybe that's where it is. Maybe that's where he is.
We'll see what happens. Look, I don't have a problem. Like if Ryan rolls into those meetings with the coaches and says, "This is the scheme that I want to run. We don't have the players to do that right now, so I'm going to alter it a little bit. But we over a course of a year or two, we need to be trying to get these types of players at these types." Every coordinator, every coach has, I guess what they would say, I'm trying to archetypes for different positions. Guys they like, got the type of player that they need for their scheme. And he has to figure out, all right, we have free agency in the draft. These are the key kind of pieces that we're missing for my individual scheme. And what we're going to get this offseason, great. Next offseason, we need to try and get the rest of them because you're never going to have a perfect world. Now, the Jaguars do have some talent on defense. I mean, I like Foye Oluokun. I think he should fit well in this defense. I mean, Foye is a tackling machine. He should fit well into any defense at this point. I think Tyson's going to be healthy again, and he should be able to be fine. I think there's some questions about Darius Williams and his fit, but he played some press man in L.A. before he came here. So we'll see just where that happens. He's also one that has a contract situation, so he may or may not be with the team. Look, there's a few other pieces. He's at least walking in and inheriting a team that has a pair of pass rushers. Even if Josh Allen's on the franchise tag, which he's going to be, you got Josh on one side, you got Trayvon on the other side. Josh will be incentivized again to go have a big season to get his money. And Trayvon is coming into his own, coming off his first double-digit sack season of his career. So there's pieces there. Like, do you feel great about maybe some of the interior or defensive linemen? Yeah, not really.
Yeah.
Do you feel great about where Devin Lloyd is right now? I mean, you feel better right now than you maybe did going into last season, but I mean, you don't feel like he's on the cusp of becoming an all-pro. At least I don't. We'll see. Andre Sisco was banged up last season, so year 4 for him. Year 4 for him. So we'll see what happens there. Questions about if Rayshon's back. You got to feel good about where Antonio Johnson's at going into his second year. So now the question is, does he go and try and play in that slot? I don't think he's a man-to-man slot guy, but does he slide into a role, or is there more 3 safety looks? How does that look on that defense? But there are some pieces there. So, but there are also some pieces that they have to go get.
Right.
And I don't think there's big question marks on what those are. So now they just have to go take care of business.
Yeah. And I look at the scheme system, and I'm going to use a basketball term, throwing back to basketball fans back in the 90s. Paul Westphal, coach, remember? I don't know if you remember him.
I do not remember
maybe
Paul
before
Westphal.
your time, but he was a guy that liked to run it and gun it, and he said, "I want to be the first NBA team I think he coached the Nuggets at some point. I want to be the first NBA team to score 200 points in a game. I'm going to score. We want to score. We want to shoot the ball every 10 seconds. We want to shoot the ball fast. So he was drafting guys that were, gunners. He wanted to get up and down the court, throw it up. Oh, well, you got to be able to play defense. Yeah, you're scoring 150 points, but you're giving up 165. So, again, your scheme is only as important as the players you have in your system to run that scheme. So,
Right.
A Paul Westphal team, yeah, you could score points, but you couldn't play a lick of defense. So, yeah, you're scoring 130, 140, 150 a game, but you're giving up 140, 150, 160 a game, which is crazy to think. So I look at today's press conference and I say Ryan Nielsen hit the nail on the head with it because he said a lot of things. I think players heard that as well today. And okay, that's good. And instead of trying to make the players into what into fitting a traditional 3-4-4-3 man's type of scheme, I think he's going to say, Tyson, you're going to play exactly what you do best. Darius, you're going to play exactly what you do best. And he's going to adjust. And I think that's why we could see a lot of hybrid defenses. And, what was a stat on how many percentage of his defenses in Atlanta overall were man covered?
He ran
60?
the most in the NFL.
Yeah, so
it was the most in the. No one else ran nearly as many man coverage reps, according to NFL Next Gen Stats, as the Atlanta Falcons.
Okay.
So whatever Trent Baalke tells you, he said in that press conference. Look, Trent may know a little bit, and Ryan alluded to it, that even their zone looks look like that press man look. But according to NFL Next Gen Stats, the Falcons ran the most man coverage in the NFL last season, and it wasn't close.
And that's crazy to me. Okay, and the Falcons weren't a great defense, but they had a lot of recycled parts. They had veterans there, and they actually got some stuff done. And I think Jacksonville has a more talented defense than Atlanta. Especially when you figure Josh Allen will be back, according to Trent Baalke. And I think they have more pieces than Atlanta did. So I do think we could see similar numbers to what the Falcons did. I don't think we will see this time next year. I don't think we're going to say, man, Jacksonville ran the most man defense in the NFL. I don't think we'll be there.
We might. We'll see. We'll see how it shakes out. There's one other thing I want to hit on, and then let's actually talk a little bit more about that Falcons defense. I want to hit on one thing that I think it was a review from players already going into this. I remember Cam Jordan, DeMario Davis talking about how phenomenal Ryan Nielsen is as a teacher. Mm-hmm. And he mentioned that today, and he mentioned that about his staff. He couldn't announce the staff, so the announcement of his defensive staff is coming right around the corner. But he said, we've got some phenomenal men, we've got some phenomenal teachers. And he talked about the importance of being a teacher, to teach fundamentals, to teach the scheme, which is big. Like, we've talked a lot about the Jaguars' previous defensive staff. One thing we never described them as is teachers.
Yeah.
And I never heard them describe themselves as teachers.
Well, I think you look at Mike Caldwell; he was still learning,
right?
But you mentioned teaching. I mean, Doug Peterson has said that exact phrase in multiple press conferences throughout last season, where we've got to teach, we've got to lead, we want to listen and hear what the guys are telling us, so we can get back and do it. And I think with the defensive staff, with a Mike Caldwell situation last year, Mike just did not have that quote-unquote teaching kind of experience. He was a first-time defensive coordinator, so I do think that it was a little new, and I think Mike was still learning on the fly, and I don't know if he was the best in a sense of a Ryan Nielsen, Doug Peterson teacher type of personality. I think Mike was still learning the system as he went, and you come from that cover 2, that Tampa 2 kind of defense. You didn't see a lot of that in Jacksonville. You didn't see a lot of that. And I do think that was because Mike was still a little green as a DC, and I don't think we're in that same situation with Ryan Nielsen in Jacksonville.
Ryan runs the more in vogue defense in the NFL right now. There's going to be shell coverage over the top to prevent those big plays, so your safeties are going to hang out deeper. He likes to have the corners up and press, whether it's press bail, press man, going into zone, whatever it is, but he wants them to take away those short routes, challenge the receivers at the line of scrimmage. So that's going to be important as we talk about options for the offseason. But he also likes to simulate some pressure. So even if they're going to send 4, it might look like they're sending the house. He wants to look like he's sending from one side and then just send one guy from the backside and bail out. So that way the quarterbacks have all these mind games that they have to go through pre-snap. And the Jaguars defense last year, while they did deploy some exotic looks at times to get guys on some one-on-one looks. They didn't do a whole lot of things that really challenged quarterbacks mentally. And all of the guys that were connected to the Jaguars' jobs were coordinators that did things on their defense that simulated these pressures, that challenged these quarterbacks mentally, that were going to make these teams at least pause pre-snap and say, am I in the right play for the look that this defense is about to deploy? So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how all the pieces come together. I do think he has at least a few tools to work with.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in agreement. I know people always like to say, winning the press conference. How do you think he won the day, won the press conference? I think, and I mean, anybody can say they won the press conference, but yeah. I do think I came out of this, and I think fans probably did as well, came out of this feeling like, okay, this guy's gonna do some stuff. And
sure.
I think it goes back to playing to your strengths. I think it comes back to being the teacher you alluded to, and being a guy that's why I think Doug Peterson is well liked and respected in Jacksonville, like he was in Philadelphia. I think he's a teacher. I think he's a player's coach, maybe too strong words that almost suggests that you're not as rigid or tough when you need to be.
But he's a former player, so he is a little bit because he understands what they've been through.
I think Doug Peterson is a guy who will listen. I don't think he's the gruff, terse guy who's going to blow something off. He talked about in the last availability we had with him about exit interviews and really kind of trying to dive into where these players were at and trying to digest from them what they took out of the season, what changes need to be made and stuff. So I think Ryan Nielsen, in a sense, too, he's still somewhat of a younger guy. Sure. He's a former player. He's been around the gamut of colleges and then NFL. And I think he understands that. And I think you do get a little bit more of that teaching, listening, believing, and giving your players ownership in a situation than maybe has been in Jacksonville on that defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, look, I like Ryan Nielsen. He was one of the first guys that I listed off as an option that said this is the guy that I think the Jaguars needed. But here's the one thing that I want to caution everybody with. The introductory press conference, every coach wins that.
Everybody wins.
It is. I don't know if I've ever seen a fan base or a journalist or anybody walk away from the introductory press conference and be like, this guy completely changed my opinion. He's not the guy anymore. It's the introductory press conference. Let's at least wait until the players get out on the field before we start making any referendums about the guy. All right, I got two things I want to cover before we wrap this thing up. First, let's talk about the how he found out about the job. So Trent Baalke had kind of given us a little bit of it. So he was at Disney with the family. He's at Disney with the family, finds out he's in the line for It's a Small World. And he finds out he can interview for the Jaguars job. He said it felt like that ride, he had actually just sat down in the boat, felt like the ride lasted 30 minutes. And all I can think of is, you were listening to It's a Small World for 30 minutes? That would be absolutely miserable.
Man, you want to listen to he had a great quote on that. You want to listen to that real quick?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's loop in that quote. He takes you through, and it's pretty awesome.
I've got our kids and my wife's on the other end, and we just sat down on the boat and got a text from Coach Peterson, basically said, hey, Ryan is coach and would like to talk to you, that type of deal. And I looked at my wife and I'm like, how long is this going to be? Like, I got to make a call, right? And so you don't realize I can't remember last time I was on A Small World, but it seemed about a half an hour, that ride, and eventually got off and it worked out. But yeah, so that's how it all, and then we were down there and it was really easy, came up for the interview and kind of went from there. So yeah, it was pretty interesting how it all worked out.
Look, I think that's great. He was right up the road, so it was like, it's perfect. All right, just drive on up. Or the Jaguars could have drove down and met him, whatever.
Well, you got to go to therapy, though. It's a small world.
For 30 minutes.
I mean, I've been there at Disney World with young kids, and man, alive, it's a small world after all, on repeat in your head. I may go home and listen to that tonight just from that. Poor Ryan Nielsen. I mean, you imagine, a huge job interview. You get a text from Doug Peterson about, hey, we want to talk to you after your first interview was blocked by the Falcons.
Right.
So you're denied at that point. So you get this text from Doug Peterson. Thing part's already stressful enough, Jamal. I mean, you've been there before. I mean, they're already stressful enough, and you get this life-changing text, and you got to wait for 30 minutes to get outside and make that call. But so it's such a good story.
That is perfect. I actually absolutely loved that story. All right, last thing I want to do. So you started going through some of the players and got my wheels turning. I've pulled up the Atlanta Falcons depth chart
All right.
for last season on their defense on the phone, and we're just going to quickly go through and say better or worse for some different positions. So basically, this depth chart is listed as a 3-4, so we'll look at the Jaguars defense in a similar spot. You want to start on the D-line or in the secondary?
D-line.
All right, so their defensive line, Calais Campbell, David Onyemata, and Grady Jarrett. So Jarrett and Campbell were their ends with Onyemata as the nose. Upgrade or downgrade?
I'm going to say Falcons line is better.
Yeah. Grady Jarrett's probably a better player than any of the three that Jaguars have right now.
Calais is old, but, I mean, the guy's still productive as can be.
He's still productive. I'd say he's better than Foley right now, and then David Onyemata definitely had a better season than Devon Hamilton last year.
So we're in agreement on that one.
Agreement that he downgraded a little bit there. And that's one of the spots we've talked about repeatedly.
Upgrading, got to.
Jaguars have to find a way to get better at.
Got to.
All right, linebackers. They had, I'm not even going to attempt this name, Agundaja? Yeah. Okay.
Common spelling.
Yeah, of course. Nate Landman and Troy Anderson. Now, there were some injuries there, but Troy Anderson, Nate Landman, and Agundaja.
Well, he definitely an upgrade when you talk about Foyer.
Yes.
Has been as good. And, I mean, jury's still out on Devin Lloyd and Chad Muma. But, again, you got Josh Allen there as well, edge. So, Jags, significant upgrade for Ryan.
Right, and I left off Bud Dupree. That was the other linebacker. So, yeah, I'm with you. Big upgrade there because now he's walking in with Trayvon, Josh, Foyer, and Devin Lloyd. I think he's in a much better spot at linebacker. So, one downgrade, one upgrade. So, the tiebreaker is going to be in the secondary. Now, here's the caveat, is their secondary has one player that made the All-Pro list and was in the Pro Bowl. The Jaguars have none. So this is going to be a tough sell. So let's actually separate them so we can at least...
Corners and safeties.
Corners and safeties. So, all right. So their slot... no, they don't have a slot listed. So they had A.J. Terrell, Clark Phillips III, rookie that we talked about last year. Was he a rookie? I don't know. Clark Phillips III. We talked about him at some point on this podcast. And Jeff Okudah. So that was their three top corners there. They also had D. Alford, so he played some. So that was their secondary. So Jaguars, of course, had Tyson Campbell, had a down year. Darius Williams. Last year was Trey Herndon. Don't know how that's going to work out. or Antonio Johnson finished the year at slot, so maybe we include him in that conversation.
That's almost a wash to me, but I mean, Jeff Okudah is a cast off. I mean, he's
he's a free agent that we're going to talk about here.
Complete disappointment in early in his career. So I would say Jags in that spot. I mean, all things considered, I mean, Tyson had a down year. Darius, good year. Antonio, promise as a nickel kind of guy. So I would say Jags by a nose in that situation.
I'd say the best player of the bunch there is A.J. Terrell.
Yeah.
So I'd actually lean Falcons.
Okay.
I'd actually lean Falcons. Not by a large margin, but I'm going to lean Falcons on that one.
Okay.
So
you're thinking A.J. better than Darius?
Yes.
A.J. better than a healthy Tyson?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
He's done it. Tyson has had 1 year of healthy production elite. AJ's been in the league longer and has done it for a more extended time. So give me AJ. There's no shot at Tyson. I think Tyson can get back healthy and fit in this system, but
veteran. I get that.
So I lean there. All right, safeties. This is where the problem
tough here.
DeMarco Helms was their strong safety, and Jesse Bates III was the free safety. That's the problem.
That's a killer right there.
Yes. So definitely Jesse Bates is the best player of the bunch without a doubt. But he does have Rayshon, Antonio Johnson, wherever you'd like to slot him, and Andre Cisco. So might be a downgrade there too.
It's tough in a sense because you got the extreme high of Bates, but you have the balance of the Jags. Yeah. So I like the balance and I like the depth of Jacksonville more than I like the Falcons' entire safety unit. But Jesse Bates is the best player on that defense, and he would be probably the second best player on Jacksonville's defense. You add him in there behind Josh Allen.
So here's the thing. So while the Falcons, I think we're leaning Falcons at a few positions as far as like overall, we start listing the best players on all these defenses. Like, look, A.J. Terrell is probably the best player A.J. Terrell and Jesse Bates would be the best players in the Falcons secondary. We still feel pretty good about Tyson.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel pretty good about Andre Cisco in this situation.
Absolutely.
Getting healthy. I think he's in a contract year.
Yep.
Guys show up in contract years. money talks. But at linebacker, Foye is head and shoulders above their entire bunch. Again, we'll have a long discussion about Devin Lloyd at some point and some of the ups and downs of his career, but I feel pretty good about him compared to some of the linebackers that they've had. And Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker, like the difference in the linebackers in these two is by far the biggest gap. Like if the Falcons are maybe, at least for me, a 5 or a 6, the Jaguars are probably in that 7, 8-ish range. So the Jaguars linebacker group, much better here. The defensive line group, I don't think the gap's that big.
No, I don't think so.
So it's not a big change in some spots, but it's a significant change, I think. But I do think overall that he should be looking at the Jaguars defense, probably saying he's in a better spot than he was with that.
And when you look
defense.
you look at, you say Josh and Trayvon will be back together, terrorizing teams. Those guys had nearly 28 sacks together. Yeah. The Falcons had nowhere near that between two guys.
Yeah, they were leaning on Bud Dupree, a rookie from Ohio State. His name's escaping me right now, but I know he's from Ohio State. Wasn't a first-round pick. I think he might have been a second or third. And old man Calais Campbell, who's a free agent again.
Yep. So I think player for player, I think it's an upgrade for Ryan Nielsen. I think player to player, when you look at the 53, whatever the defensive breakdown is, when you look at the 25 to 25 in terms of defensive to defensive guys, I think Jacksonville is in a better position. And the upgrades will enhance that. I think you're going to get strong on the defensive line. I think you're going to get an infusion of talent in the secondary, be it by releasing Rayshon, putting Antonio in there, drafting a corner maybe at 17. So I think you get better. There's more building blocks. There's far more that the Falcons have to do to build off that. I mean, Calais a year older. He's not back.
He's a free agent.
Yeah, so I think they're better overall, Jacksonville.
What's interesting, too, is I think some of the players that we listed through have a chance at coming to Jacksonville. If I'm not mistaken, David Onyemata is a free agent too. Calais is a free agent. If Onyemata is a free agent, he'd be one that I'd keep an eye on. I got to double check that, so don't quote me on that one. But if he is a free agent, he followed Allen from New Orleans to Atlanta. It would be interesting to see if he followed him from Atlanta to here. But the one guy, and you kind of was trying to like flush him, Jeff Okudah. Look. They don't have – you can't spend money at every spot.
Yeah, that's true.
Jeff Okudah was a high draft pick. It was for the Jaguars. The conversation had been, is it going to be Jeff Okudah or C.J. Henderson? Jeff Okudah went earlier to the Lions. Jaguars took C.J. Henderson. C.J. didn't work out. Jeff Okudah didn't work out great either.
It's like saying, would you rather have pneumonia or the bad case? Not a good
But there's
comparison.
a but. Jeff had injuries.
Yeah, he did.
His problems were he couldn't stay on the field. He also couldn't stay on the field last year for Atlanta. But when he has been healthy over the past few seasons, he's starting to show that he can play. So he might be a bargain basement kind of guy that Ryan Nielsen could bring from Atlanta for not a whole lot of money. And if he is healthy, could pay some dividends.
Yeah.
A 1-year prove-it deal kind of player, because he is a free agent, that could come to Jacksonville if they're looking to move on from a Darius and say, all right, Jeff, we're going to put you here, but we're also going to draft a guy in maybe the second or third that is going to come in, push you for that spot, and if you don't show up, guess what? That guy's the starter next year anyway. So,
yeah, it makes sense. And when a Jeff Okudah, he could be a guy like a DJ Hayden kind of guy who comes here, a veteran guy who's kind of had a checker. I mean, DJ was a high draft pick,
100%,
and top 10 draft pick, and he struggled with injuries big time. He almost died in college from a terrible injury to his chest. And rest in peace. He's no longer with us now, but he had an impact in Jacksonville when he was here. I mean, again, a veteran guy who didn't pan out his earlier stops, and he comes in. Contributes, wasn't a star by any means in Jacksonville, but was a contributor. And I think an Okudah kind of follows that line where he could be that, a spot starter kind of guy. I mean, when you got guys like Patrick Peterson still playing and logging 1,000 snaps in the NFL. I mean
Jeff Okudah, no Patrick Peterson.
He's no. But I mean, a guy who's long in the tooth can come in and still give you pretty meaningful snaps if he can stay healthy.
Look, and with players like that have had injuries, teams tend to go back to the college tape.
Yeah.
He's been in the NFL long enough that he's getting towards the end of that college tape. But the potential was there, and he's shown flashes of it in the league now. It wouldn't surprise me if he's a guy that the Jaguars said, look, we're switching this scheme a little bit. You have some familiarity. 1-year contract. Come here, show what you can do.
Let me pose this
Option.
to you. So, $10 million Darius. There's a $500,000 dead money if they got rid of Darius, so not a lot.
I thought it was 16. Is it 10?
I thought it was $10 million.
Okay.
I thought he was a $10 million guy.
Let's say 10.
So Darius, $10 million.
Sorry.
I mean, that's what he's going to make, $10 million this year.
Sure.
Last year of his deal. If you could get Jeff Okudah at, say, $4 million, do you split that? Say, Darius, you've been great for us. Here's your walking papers. You put Jeff Okudah, kind of like the situation you just mentioned, and you get Jeff out there at $4.5 million. You can draft the guy at 17. You make that switch right now.
Ooh, yeah.
Make that switch. Okay.
I'd make that switch.
Darius
right now.
being that you're betting there on Jeff kind of being a comparable. I mean, at worst, he probably slides inside to be a nickel guy.
I'm betting that Darius is on the wrong side of 30, that he has 1 year left on his contract, and that I probably wouldn't re-up him anyway.
Okay.
And that if I'm going to take a corner early in the draft, that guy's going to be my starter, so I definitely wouldn't re-up him because he's not a nickel.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm drafting a corner in the first round, then he's a starter, and he's going to start on the outside. So Jeff Okudah comes in. If Jeff hits, great. He goes and gets paid somewhere. If he doesn't hit, he's a spot starter, and I slide that first round guy into the starting spot, and I just got to figure out nickel again.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd take that bet,
Okay.
and then that's some extra money that I can
$6 million
throw around
saving,
towards the defensive line or the offensive line. Yeah, I'd do it.
Okay.
Do it in a
Interesting. Because Darius was the best corner last year.
He was
for the team.
He was.
Best
He was
corner.
the best corner. He also turned around and ran away from Trent Williams. And
The thing that worries me about it in Okudah is the fact that you've had injuries. That's been a hallmark of his career.
100%, sure.
And, I mean, he's coming off a year where he wasn't exactly that shutdown kind of guy in Atlanta. He wasn't healthy for all 17 games.
No.
So, I mean, to me, it's $6 million savings in this scenario. You're trading your best corner for a guy who may get you 10 games. So, I don't know. It's
Well, the
interesting
scenario you
have.
threw out was that the Jaguars were drafting a
Yep.
cornerback in the first round. If that's my plan, then I'm not that concerned with it. As long as he can if you told me right now, like let's put we'll even put a game cap
All
on
right.
it. If you told me Jeff Okudah was healthy for 7 games next season,
Oof.
and the Jaguars were drafting a corner in the first round, they're just in stone. The best corner on the board's coming to Jacksonville. Enough said. I'm still taking Jeff Okudah because now I have a first round rookie who I'm just going to move into that spot. And then I just have to figure out nickel again.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
To me, it's simple. Jeff would be a spot filler.
Mhm.
It's, all right, I have a starter in-house, so I don't have to pick corner. But in this scenario, you're telling me they are picking a corner in the first round. So I'm picking a corner anyway. So now I have this corner in-house. I've made that decision. Early in the season, we'll play him in the slot. For sake of conversation, do you want to pick a corner? We can say Kool-Aid McKinstry.
Okay.
We'll start the season with Kool-Aid in the slot, Jeff on the outside on one side, Tyson on the outside on the other side. Jeff goes down, Kool-Aid goes outside, and then you figure out, is it Greg Jr., Montague Brown, whatever. That guy becomes your nickel. Antonio Johnson, for sake of conversation, goes back to the nickel spot. Kool-Aid was going to be my outside guy next year, whether it was Darius or Jeff.
Yeah.
Now he just gets some experience earlier. Really, I just want Jeff here, if that's the scenario. I'd want Jeff here just because that way I don't have to throw my rookie into the deep end week 1.
Yeah, makes sense. And I just with the injury history of Jeff and the up and down anyway. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're getting 7 games out of him, that's a lot to ask. I would be more comfortable keeping Darius,
Sure.
And I don't know, with Tyson's struggles last year.
Yeah.
With Darius being the guy, Darius had a great season for Jacksonville. So he was a big interception guy, and I think Tyson, I think whoever else is in there, I think Antonio has a better season if that defensive line gets better for sure. And I don't know. I mean, do you go cornerback? Do you go offensive line in the first round? That's probably another podcast.
We're going to have a lot of talks about what the Jaguars should do, will do in the first round. I think the next one we have scheduled is talking about free agents,
Yep.
some under-the-radar guys, and some big-ticket free agents that we think would fit in Jacksonville to fill some of the holes. So we'll definitely have some more talks. Jeff Okudah was at least on my early plans to be one of my under the radar guys, but I'll switch him out now since we've already had the Jeff Okudah conversation.
I'd be so hesitant putting him on the outside there and saying, hey, this is our number one guy until our rookie 17.
Well, Tyson's your number one guy.
Yeah, I don't know. Darius was number one guy last year.
Because Tyson was hurt.
Tyson
never got healthy last year.
Tyson's had one good season, and he's had two very disappointing seasons. And I was high on Tyson, man. He looked good in training camp. He looked good in training camp last year and parlayed that into a great second season in the NFL.
Yep.
Third season just wasn't there.
Tyson was never healthy last year. It was a hamstring, and then if you want to talk about how the leg works, so you overcompensate for the hamstring. He hurt the quad, and the two work together in tandem. It never got right. So I'm willing to give him a mulligan. I'm willing to give him a mulligan on that one. I mean, but we can say similar things about Darius. That first year in Jacksonville was bad until the very end.
He was playing out of position. He was playing out of position.
It was bad until the very end, and they moved him outside. Last season was good. Look, we'll talk about whether or not Darius is stay. We actually have talked in depth about it. We're kind of on the fence. Look, they can stay and keep him and save some money, rework the deal. Ideally, rework the deal. But if Ryan Nielsen comes in and says, "Look, he ain't the guy," all right, move on.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah, it makes sense.
We'll see.
Good conversation.
Yeah, good conversation. So we'll have another one of these News for Jags podcasts back on our scheduled off-season sort of content, but we want to stop for a minute and talk about Ryan Nielsen, the Jaguars' new defensive coordinator who is here in town. Thanks for hanging out with us. Make sure you subscribe wherever you're watching from, and hopefully we'll see you next time.